say faith is the Emperor's greatest gift. I believed this once. Now I know faith is a chain, and excommunication is not freedom but a severing of the soul itself. My name was Canoness Superior Melodia of the Order of the Sacred Rose. I served the Emperor for 137 years without question. Then I woke during my own judgment and discovered that damnation wears the Ecclesiarchy's face. The heretics died screaming prayers to false gods. This was proper. This was righteous. The burning of the corrupted shrine on Ophelia Secundus filled the night sky with orange light that seemed almost holy in its fury. I led my battle sisters through the ruins with bolt pistol in one hand and the litany of divine fury on my lips. We moved as one organism, decades of training and faith binding us more completely than any neural link. Sister Agatha swept right, her heavy flamer purging a nest of cultists who had dared defile the Emperor's iconography with their blasphemous symbols. Sister Dominica advanced left, her bolter barking controlled bursts that found the throat and chest of every target. Sister Helena provided overwatch from the ruined bell tower, her sniper rifle speaking once every few seconds with lethal precision. I had fought beside these women for 70 years. I knew their breathing patterns in combat, could anticipate their movements before they made them. This was the unity the Order demanded, the perfection of synchronized service to him on Terra. We were his angels of retribution, armored in faith and ceramite, purging the unclean with holy fire. The cult had taken root in what had once been a shrine to Saint Celestine. The irony was bitter poison. They had covered her blessed visage with obscene murals depicting the ruinous powers. They had turned her altar into a slaughtering table, where they sacrificed the faithful to things that should not be named. When the Ecclesiarchy had detected their corruption through missed tithes and silenced astropathic communications, our order had been dispatched to cleanse. We came like judgment itself, drop pods screaming from orbit to impact the shrine compound at dawn. 40 battle sisters against an estimated 300 cultists. The odds were irrelevant. We were adepta sororitas. We were the Emperor's fury made flesh. The cultists fought with the desperate madness of those who know their souls are already forfeit. They had surrendered their humanity for promises of power and transcendence. What they had received instead was mutation and degradation. Some wore their former faces like masks over tentacled horror. Others had fused with their weapons in grotesque marriage of flesh and metal. All of them stank of the warp, of corruption that could spread like plague if not contained. I put them down without hesitation or mercy. My bolt pistol's machine spirit sang hymns of destruction as mass-reactive rounds found corrupted hearts. My power sword carved through twisted bodies with edges blessed by the Cardinal of Ophelia VII himself. Each kill was a prayer, each death a devotion. We had purged the shrine's outer chambers within the first hour. The cultists fell back to the inner sanctum, the heart of their blasphemy. This was expected. Heretics always retreated to their most defiled spaces, as if proximity to their false gods might save them. It never did. Sister Agatha breached the sanctum doors with melta charges that vaporized the corrupted iron. We advanced into a space that made my faith burn hotter with righteous fury. The walls pulsed with organic matter. The floor was slick with substances that should not exist in real space. The altar had been transformed into something that hurt to perceive directly. Angles and surfaces that violated geometry itself. And behind the altar, the cult leader waited. A former priest, our intelligence suggested, who had opened himself to corruption through forbidden texts. He wore robes that seemed to be woven from screaming faces. His hands had become claws of bone and shadow. When he spoke, his voice came from too many mouths. He offered us transcendence. He promised power beyond the Emperor's gift. He spoke of truths that would shatter our faith and remake us as gods ourselves. Sister Helena shot him in the throat before he could finish his blasphemous sermon. His head snapped back, surprise evident even on his twisted features. He had expected us to listen, to be tempted. He did not understand that our faith was armor more complete than any ceramite plate. The remaining cultists broke then, their leader's death shattering whatever dark courage had sustained them. They scattered like vermin, fleeing through passages that led deeper into the shrine's catacombs. Standard protocol dictated pursuit and total extermination. Leave no heretic alive. Suffer not the corrupt to draw breath. I raised my hand to signal the advance when I heard it. A sound that should not have been present in this place of corruption and death. The crying of children. We found them in a side chamber, huddled behind overturned pews. 17 children, ages ranging from perhaps 5 to 12. They wore the simple clothes of shrine pilgrims. Their faces were streaked with tears and grime. They trembled when they saw us, our power armor and weapons making us appear as terrifying as the cultists we had slain. A girl, perhaps 8 years old, stepped forward. She made the sign of the Aquila with shaking hands. Her voice was barely a whisper, but I heard every word with perfect clarity through my helmet's auto-senses. "Please," she said. "Are you the Emperor's angels? Have you come to save us?" Sister Dominica's voice came through the squad vox, cold and measured. Potential contamination. The children witnessed the rituals. They may carry taint. She was correct, technically. Anyone exposed to chaos, corruption, even innocence, represented a vector for further spread. The safest course was to eliminate all witnesses. This was doctrine. This was how the Imperium had survived 10,000 years of existential threat. I looked at the children. They looked back at me with hope dying slowly in their eyes as they began to understand that we might be angels of death rather than salvation. My faith had always been absolute. I believed the Emperor protected the faithful. I believed our purpose was to defend humanity, not just to kill its enemies. I believed that innocence, true innocence, untouched by choice or willing corruption, deserved protection even at tactical cost. Sister Agatha's voice joined Dominica's on the vox. "Canoness, the cultists are escaping through the catacombs. Every moment we delay allows them to scatter. If we extract the children first, we may lose the heretics." Standard doctrine was clear. Pursue the heretics. Eliminate the potential contamination vectors. Complete the mission with maximum efficiency. Do not let sentiment compromise operational purity. I looked at the children again. The girl who had spoken still held the Aquila sign, maintaining it despite her fear, despite her exhaustion. She had faith. She believed the Emperor protected. She believed we served him by protecting the innocent. I made my choice. Sister Helena, maintain overwatch. Sister Agatha, Sister Dominica, secure the children for extraction. We fall back to the landing zone and call for decontamination teams. The cultists who escape into the catacombs will be sealed inside. Demolition charges at all exits. No one leaves this shrine alive except those we carry out. There was a pause on the vox. Then Sister Dominica replied, voice carefully neutral. Confirmed, Canoness. We extracted all 17 children. They clung to us as we moved through the shrine, their small hands gripping our armor. The girl who had spoken rode on my shoulders, her arms wrapped around my helmet. She whispered prayers the entire journey, thanking the Emperor for his protection. We reached the landing zone as dawn fully broke over Ophelia Secundus. The Valkyrie transport ships descended to collect us. Behind us, the shrine erupted in controlled detonations as the demolition charges activated, sealing the catacombs and whatever cultists had fled into their depths. 3 cultists escaped. The after-action reports would note this, but 17 children lived who would have died under strict tactical protocol. I submitted my report with complete honesty. I had chosen to prioritize extraction of Imperial citizens over immediate pursuit of fleeing heretics. I had determined that the children showed no signs of voluntary corruption and deserved the Emperor's mercy. The children were placed in ecclesiarchal care. They would be examined, cleansed, and raised in the Schola Progenium if found pure. They would serve the Imperium in some capacity. Their lives would have meaning and purpose. I returned to our convent on Ophelia 7th with quiet pride. We had purged a shrine of corruption. We had eliminated the cult leadership. We had saved innocence. The mission was a success by any reasonable measure. Canoness Commander Palmyra met us at the landing pad. Her face was unreadable, as always, but something in her posture suggested displeasure. She dismissed the rest of my squad and asked me to accompany her to her private chapel. We walked in silence through the convent's halls. Sisters going about their duties bowed as we passed. Everything was as it had always been, orderly and faithful and righteous. Yet something felt different. A weight in the air. A pressure I could not name. In her chapel, surrounded by icons of the Emperor and the saints, Palmyra finally spoke. "Your report has been forwarded to the Inquisition," she said. "There are questions about your conduct during the Ophelia Secundus operation." I felt confusion rather than concern. Questions? The mission was successful. You deviated from tactical doctrine to extract civilians. 3 heretics escaped because of this choice. Those heretics may spread their corruption elsewhere. The children you saved may themselves be tainted vectors. You prioritized sentiment over operational security. "I saved the faithful," I replied. "The Emperor protects his own. We serve him by protecting humanity, not by becoming butchers who see only targets." Palmyra's expression softened slightly, almost sadly. "I believe you meant well, Sister Melodia. But the Inquisition must determine if your judgment was sound or if you have been compromised by excessive compassion. You will make yourself available for their investigation." "Of course," I said. "I have nothing to hide. I followed my conscience and the Emperor's will." She placed her hand on my shoulder, a gesture of unexpected intimacy. Then, "Pray your conscience aligns with their doctrine." I left her chapel believing this would be a formality. A few questions, a review of the tactical situation, perhaps a minor notation in my service record. I had served the Order for 137 years without blemish. Surely, that counted for something. I believed the Emperor saw into hearts. I believed faith and service mattered more than rigid adherence to protocol. I believed my century of devotion would shield me from institutional suspicion. I was wrong about all of it. The summons arrived 3 weeks after my return from Ophelia Secundus. A formal document bearing the seal of the Ordo Hereticus, delivered by a skull-faced servo-skull that hovered at eye level until I acknowledged receipt. The parchment was heavy, expensive, the kind reserved for matters of utmost seriousness. My presence was required before an inquisitorial tribunal to answer questions regarding conduct unbecoming of an Adepta Sororitas officer. I read it twice, searching for details that were not provided. The charges were vague, wrapped in bureaucratic language that said everything and nothing. Dereliction of duty, compromise of operational security, potential doctrinal deviation. Each phrase was carefully chosen to sound damning, without specifying actual crimes. Sister Agatha found me in the meditation chamber, still holding the summons. Her face showed concern she tried to mask with professional neutrality. "Have you been called to account, Canoness?" "Questions only," I replied, setting the parchment aside. "A review of the Ophelia Secundus operation. Standard procedure after any deviation from tactical doctrine." She nodded, but her eyes betrayed doubt. "We will pray for you," she said, "for the Emperor's guidance in your testimony." I appreciated her concern but felt no real worry. I had acted righteously. I had saved innocent lives while still completing the primary mission. The heretic cult was destroyed, their shrine cleansed. Surely the Inquisition would see that the mission's success outweighed minor tactical compromises. The tribunal was scheduled for 10 days hence, giving me time to prepare my testimony and review all records of the operation. I spent those days in prayer and contemplation, reinforcing my certainty that I had acted correctly. The Emperor protected the faithful. I had protected the faithful. Therefore, I had enacted the Emperor's will. On the appointed day, I dressed in my full ceremonial armor, each piece blessed and anointed according to ritual. I wore my rosarius, the sacred icon that marked my rank and devotion. I carried no weapons, as was proper when appearing before the Inquisition. My faith would be my only defense, and it had never failed me before. The inquisitorial fortress on Ophelia VII was a structure designed to intimidate. Black stone walls rose like cliffs from the city below. Gargoyles depicting saints in agony lined the battlements. The entrance was a massive gate adorned with the inquisitorial seal, that stylized eye with its 3 bars representing the 3 major ordos. Everything about the architecture screamed authority and judgment. I was met at the gate by 2 stormtroopers in carapace armor, their lasguns held at parade rest. They escorted me through corridors lined with statues of famous inquisitors from millennia past. Each stone face gazed down with expressions of cold certainty. They had found heresy and burned it. They had questioned and found wanting. They had judged and shown no mercy. We descended deeper into the fortress, moving from the public halls into sections where only the accused and their judges walked. The air grew colder, the lighting dimmer, every detail calculated to erode confidence and create psychological pressure. I was shown to a waiting chamber and told to prepare myself. The stormtroopers departed, sealing the door behind them. I knelt before a small shrine to the Emperor and prayed, asking for strength and clarity of purpose. I prayed for, perhaps, an hour before the door opened again. Inquisitor Covenant entered without announcement. He was a tall man, thin to the point of gauntness, his face a collection of sharp angles and cold eyes. He wore the black armor of the Ordo Hereticus, decorated with purity seals and scripture. A plasma pistol hung at his hip, and a power sword rested across his back. Everything about him spoke of lethal efficiency. "Canoness Superior Melodia," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "I am Inquisitor Covenant of the Ordo Hereticus. I will be conducting your interrogation, not interview. Please, sit." He gestured to a simple metal chair. I remained standing. He studied me for a moment, then seated himself behind a desk that seemed to materialize from the room's shadows. "Very well. Let us begin." He produced a data slate and began reading from it. "On the 14th day of the 2nd month of the year 987 M41, you led a purge operation against heretical forces on Ophelia Secundus. Your mission parameters were clear. Eliminate all cultists. Cleanse the corrupted shrine. Allow no witnesses to escape. Do you dispute this accounting?" "The mission was to purge the corruption," I replied. "Answer the question, Canoness. Were your orders to allow no witnesses?" "The orders were to eliminate the cult and prevent the spread of corruption." His eyes narrowed. "You parse words like a lawyer. Yes or no, were you ordered to ensure total elimination of all potentially tainted individuals?" I hesitated, seeing the trap. "Yes, but context matters. The children were not tainted. They were victims. Were they examined by sanctioned psychers before you made this determination?" "No, but I could see they were innocent. They showed no signs of corruption." Covenant leaned forward, his expression hardening. "You made a field judgment regarding chaos taint based on visual assessment. You, who are not a psyker, not trained in detecting warp corruption, determined that 17 potential vectors were clean. And based on this untrained assessment, you diverted mission resources to extract them rather than pursue 3 confirmed heretics who subsequently escaped. The heretics were sealed in the catacombs. We demolished all exits. They could not escape. Except they did, he said, tapping his data slate. We have reports of cult activity in 3 nearby settlements, symbols matching those found in the Ophelia Secundus shrine, rituals consistent with the same heretical practices. The corruption you were meant to purge completely has spread. That cannot be confirmed, I said, feeling my certainty waver for the first time. No, but they suggest it. And even if these new outbreaks are unrelated, your deviation from mission parameters allowed known heretics to potentially escape. Your compassion for 17 children may have condemned hundreds or thousands to corruption and death. I saved Imperial citizens, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Children who prayed to the Emperor, who held faith despite their ordeal. Would you have me murder the faithful? I would have you follow your orders, Covenant said coldly. Individual lives, no matter how apparently innocent, are meaningless against the threat of chaos, corruption. One tainted child growing to adulthood could corrupt an entire world. This is why protocol exists. This is why sentiment must be purged from tactical calculations. He stood, walking around the desk to stand before me. His height forced me to look up slightly. Another calculated dominance display. Let us examine the children you saved, he continued. They were taken into ecclesiarchal custody for examination. Of the 17, 12 showed no signs of taint and were inducted into the Schola Progenium as you hoped. 5, however, exhibited subtle signs of warp exposure. Night terrors, featuring specific blasphemous imagery. Mutations beginning to manifest in early adolescence. Behavioral anomalies, consistent with demonic influence. My heart sank. They seemed innocent, Covenant finished. Because you wanted them to be innocent. Because you allowed compassion to cloud your judgment. Those 5 children have been executed, their bodies burned, their souls committed to the Emperor's mercy, such as he might grant to the tainted. I felt physically sick. 5 children dead because I had failed to detect their corruption. 5 potential sources of chaos spread, eliminated only after they had been saved, examined, and found wanting. But 12 were pure, I said weakly. 12 children now serve the Imperium because I chose mercy. And 5 were corrupt, possibly infecting others during their time in custody. The Schola Progenium facilities where they were housed must now be ritually cleansed. 37 other children who shared their dormitories must be examined for potential taint. The risk cascade from your one moment of sentiment continues to expand. He returned to his desk, making notes on the data slate. Let us discuss your reasoning. Why did you choose to extract the children rather than pursue the heretics? I believed it was the right thing to do, I said. The Emperor protects the innocent. We serve him by protecting humanity. The Emperor protects through the Imperium, Covenant replied. Through its institutions and protocols. When you place personal morality above institutional doctrine, you insert your own judgment where the Emperor's will should reign absolute. This is the first step to corruption, Canoness. The belief that your conscience supersedes established authority. I serve the Emperor, not the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy, as you dismissively call it, is how the Emperor's will is enacted across 1,000,000 worlds. Without it, the Imperium would collapse into individual interpretations of faith, each person following their own conscience into damnation. Chaos thrives in such environments. Order, rigid and absolute, is our only defense. He stood again, this time moving to the door. This interrogation is concluded for today. You will remain in custody while we continue our investigation. We will interview your squad members. We will review your service history for other instances of questionable judgment. We will determine whether your compassion is a temporary lapse or evidence of deeper corruption. I am not corrupt, I said, my voice rising despite my attempts at control. Corruption wears many faces, Canoness. Sometimes it appears as excess zeal. Sometimes as excess compassion, Both represent deviation from the Emperor's true path. We will determine which category your actions fall into. The door opened and the stormtroopers entered to escort me out. As I was led from the chamber, Covenant's final words followed me. The road to heresy is paved with good intentions, Canoness. Remember that as you contemplate your choices. I was taken to a holding cell deep within the fortress. Not a prison exactly, but a place of isolation where those under investigation were kept separate from the faithful. The cell was small, containing only a cot and a small shrine to the Emperor. I knelt before the shrine and prayed, seeking guidance and reassurance. But for the first time in my long service, the Emperor's presence felt distant, uncertain, as if my prayers were traveling through some vast space to reach him, if they reached him at all. The formal tribunal convened in the Cathedral of St. Celestine, a choice that felt deliberately symbolic. This was where the most faithful gathered to celebrate the Emperor's glory. This was where miracles were recorded and saints venerated. And this was where I would be judged, my faith weighed against institutional doctrine. They transported me in a sealed vehicle, stormtroopers flanking me on all sides despite my compliance. Through the narrow viewport, I watched the cathedral approach. Its spires reached toward the sky like accusing fingers. Stained glass windows depicted scenes of martyrdom and triumph, saints dying gloriously in service to the Emperor. I had always found the cathedral inspiring. Now it felt oppressive, its beauty weaponized against me. The vehicle stopped at a private entrance reserved for ecclesiastical officials and prisoners. The distinction between those categories felt distressingly thin. I was led through passages I had never seen before, servants' corridors and administrative halls that existed behind the cathedral's public grandeur. Everything was cold, stone, and harsh lighting, the beauty reserved for those who deserved it. We emerged into the Judgment Hall, a vast chamber I knew only from historical records. It was where the most serious ecclesiastical trials took place, where bishops were confirmed or excommunicated, where matters of doctrine were settled through debate and decree. The ceiling soared 20 meters overhead, painted with scenes of the Emperor's judgment. The walls were lined with statues of saints holding scales and swords, emblems of justice and retribution. At the far end of the hall stood an elevated platform where the judges sat, 6 figures in the robes and armor of ultimate authority. 3 inquisitors of the Ordo Hereticus, their black armor stark against the cathedral's ornate decoration. 2 cardinals of the Ecclesiarchy, wearing crimson robes embroidered with golden thread, and 1 representative from the Adepta Ministorum, a high priest whose face was hidden behind a ceremonial mask depicting the Emperor's visage. I was led to a simple wooden chair in the center of the hall, positioned so I faced the judges while having my back to the gallery where witnesses and observers would sit. The acoustics were designed to carry sound from the judgment platform throughout the chamber, while making it difficult for the accused to project their voice back. Every architectural detail served to reinforce the power dynamic. Inquisitor Covenant took his place among the 3 inquisitors. The center judge, a woman whose armor bore more purity seals than I had ever seen on a single person, spoke first. Her voice was amplified through voxcasters hidden throughout the hall, making her seem to speak from everywhere at once. Let this tribunal commence in the Emperor's name. We gather to examine the conduct of Canoness Superior Melodia of the Order of the Sacred Rose, who stands accused of dereliction of duty, compromise of operational security, and deviation from established doctrine. Let all testimony be given truthfully, knowing that the Emperor sees into all hearts and judges all falsehoods. The assembled observers, perhaps 200 ecclesiastical officials and senior military officers, responded in unison. In his name, we seek truth. The formality of it was suffocating. This was not a conversation about tactics or judgment. This was ritual, ceremony, a predetermined process that would lead inevitably to conclusion regardless of what I said. Cardinal Severus, the elder of the 2 cardinals present, stood next. He was ancient, perhaps 300 years old, sustained by juvenate treatments and augmentics. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries of theological authority. The charges against Canoness Melodia are grave. She stands accused not merely of tactical error, which might be forgiven, but of placing personal sentiment above the Imperium's needs. This represents a fundamental corruption of purpose, an elevation of individual conscience over collective doctrine. If allowed to spread, such thinking would undermine the very foundations upon which the Imperium stands. He gestured toward me with a hand that was more metal than flesh. We will demonstrate through testimony and evidence that the accused has consistently prioritized compassion over duty, mercy over security, and personal morality over institutional wisdom. We will show that her actions on Ophelia Secundus were not isolated incidents, but part of a pattern indicating deep-seated doctrinal deviation. The gallery behind me murmured, a sound like distant thunder. I could not see their faces, but felt their judgment pressing against my back. The first witness was called. Sister Agatha entered through a side door, moving with the rigid posture of someone deeply uncomfortable with her role. She wore her full armor but carried no weapons. She took her position at a testimony lectern positioned to my right, close enough that I could see her face in profile. Sister Agatha, the lead inquisitor, began. You served under Canoness Melodia during the Ophelia Secundus operation. Describe the mission parameters as you understood them. Agatha's voice was steady but quiet. We were ordered to purge a heretical cult that had desecrated a shrine to Saint Celestine. Total elimination of all cultists and corruption vectors was mandated. No witnesses were to survive who might carry taint. And did Canoness Melodia follow these parameters? A pause. A moment where I saw Agatha's jaw tighten. No. She ordered the extraction of 17 children found in the shrine complex. On what grounds? She determined they were innocent, untainted victims of the cult rather than willing participants. Did she conduct proper screening protocols before making this determination? No. She made a field assessment based on observation alone, and as a result of this decision, what happened to the tactical situation? 3 confirmed heretics escaped while we were extracting the children. They fled into the catacombs and could not be pursued. Thank you, Sister Agatha. The Inquisitor's tone was satisfied, each answer building their case brick by brick. One final question. In your professional judgment as an Adepta Sororitas, did Canoness Melodia's decision compromise mission success? Another pause, longer this time. Agatha turned slightly, enough that I could see the conflict in her eyes. She wanted to defend me. She wanted to speak truth about my century of service, my dedication, my faith. But she also knew that doing so might implicate her in my crimes. Her decision prioritized civilian extraction over complete heretic elimination, she said finally, each word carefully chosen. This represents a deviation from standard tactical doctrine. It was the most neutral answer she could give, neither fully condemning nor defending. But in this context, neutrality was condemnation. The tribunal noted her response with approval. Sister Dominica was called next. Her testimony was more direct, less conflicted. She described my orders to secure the children as tactically unsound. She noted that I had overruled her recommendation to eliminate potential taint vectors. She confirmed that the mission's primary objective, complete elimination of heretical presence, had been compromised by my decision. Each word was technically accurate. Stripped of context, my actions sounded indefensible. They were building a narrative where I appeared not as a faithful servant making difficult choices, but as someone who valued sentiment over duty. The third witness surprised me. Canoness Commander Palmyra herself entered the hall, moving with the authority of her rank and age. She had served for 2 centuries, longer than anyone else in the Order, save the ancient sisters preserved in life support sarcophagi. Her word carried immense weight. Canoness Commander Palmyra, Cardinal Severus addressed her with obvious respect. You have overseen Sister Melodia's service for many decades. Speak to her character and conduct. Palmyra's face was unreadable. Sister Melodia has served with distinction for 137 years. Her combat record is exemplary. She has never failed a mission or disobeyed a direct order until the incident on Ophelia Secundus. The until hung in the air like an executioner's blade. And what changed? The cardinal pressed. What might explain this sudden deviation after over a century of faithful service? Palmyra's eyes met mine briefly before returning to the judges. I believe Sister Melodia has always possessed an excess of compassion. In most circumstances, this manifested as inspirational leadership and concern for her subordinates' well-being. However, I now recognize that such compassion, unchecked by proper discipline, can become a weakness, a vulnerability that might be exploited by the enemies of mankind. She was throwing me to the wolves, reframing my entire service history as evidence of latent corruption rather than dedicated service. Every act of kindness, every moment of caring for my sisters, was being recast as proof of dangerous sentiment. Would you characterize this compassion as a form of moral weakness? Cardinal Severus asked. I would characterize it as a prioritization of individual human life over collective security. In small doses and proper contexts, this can be admirable. When it overrides tactical judgment and doctrinal compliance, it becomes heretical. The word landed like a physical blow. Heretical. Not mistaken. Not misguided. Heretical. The testimony continued for hours. Other witnesses were called, each providing fragments that built toward the same conclusion. I had valued mercy over duty. I had trusted my own judgment over established protocol. I had placed the lives of 17 children above the security of potentially millions. Finally, I was permitted to speak. The lead inquisitor gestured toward me. Canoness Melodia, you have heard the testimony against you. What is your defense? I stood, my legs stiff from hours of sitting. My voice felt weak in the vast hall. No vox amplification granted to the accused. I saved 17 children, I began. Imperial citizens who prayed to the emperor and held faith despite witnessing horrors. I determined they were innocent and deserved his protection. I completed the primary mission by destroying the cult and sealing the shrine. My decision was based on faith that the emperor values the lives of the faithful. Did you conduct proper taint screening? The inquisitor interrupted. I made an assessment based on experience and observation. An assessment proven wrong, as 5 of those children were later found corrupted. Your compassion saved 12 and unleashed 5 potential plague vectors into the Imperium's heart. Your faith was misplaced, Canoness. Faith without adherence to doctrine is not faith at all. It is presumption. It is arrogance, disguised as piety. I serve the emperor, not the bureaucracy, I said, my voice rising despite the poor acoustics. He is the arbiter of faith, not committees and protocols. The gallery erupted in shocked murmurs. Cardinal Severus rose from his seat, his ancient face twisted with righteous fury. You dare suggest that your personal interpretation of the emperor's will supersedes the Ecclesiarchy's authority? You claim direct knowledge of his intentions. This is the very definition of heresy. The belief that individual conscience trumps established doctrine. I believe the emperor protects the innocent, I replied, feeling my control slipping. I believe mercy is strength, not weakness. I believe that in saving those children, I enacted his will. Then you are a fool, Cardinal Severus declared. The emperor protects through the Imperium, through its structures and hierarchies. To claim otherwise is to invite the very chaos we fight against. The lead inquisitor raised her hand for silence. We have heard enough. The tribunal will recess to deliberate. The accused will be returned to her holding cell. As the stormtroopers moved to escort me out, I looked back at the judges. 6 faces of cold certainty, already convinced of my guilt. The trial was theater, a formality to justify a predetermined conclusion. I had believed truth would save me. I had believed my faith was armor. I was learning that in the machinery of imperial justice, truth and faith meant only what institutions said they meant. And by their definition, I was already damned. They returned me to my holding cell as evening fell across Ophelia VII. The stormtroopers sealed the door without a word, leaving me alone in the small chamber with only my thoughts and the small shrine to the Emperor. I knelt before it immediately, seeking the comfort of prayer, the reassurance of his presence that had sustained me through 137 years of service. The words came automatically, rituals ingrained so deeply they required no conscious thought. But as I spoke them, something felt wrong. The prayers seemed to echo strangely in the confined space, as if traveling through water or thick glass before dissipating into nothing. I had always felt a connection when praying, a sense of being heard even if no direct answer came. Now, I felt only emptiness. I told myself it was exhaustion. The tribunal had lasted 6 hours, and I had not eaten or rested properly in days. My enhanced physiology could endure far worse, but psychological stress took its own toll. I completed my prayers mechanically and moved to the cot, intending to sleep. Sleep would not come. I lay staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the testimonies, dissecting each accusation, searching for arguments I should have made but had not. Sister Agatha's conflicted voice, Sister Dominica's cold precision, Canoness Commander Palmyra's devastating reframing of my entire service as evidence of latent corruption. Each memory was sharp and clear, too clear, playing with uncomfortable intensity. I closed my eyes and tried to empty my mind, to find the meditative state that had always preceded rest. Instead, I found myself back in the tribunal hall, watching the proceedings from outside my own body. I could see myself sitting in the wooden chair, shoulders straight despite the pressure, maintaining dignity even as my world collapsed. The vision was vivid beyond normal memory. I could see details I had not consciously noted during the actual trial. The way Cardinal Severus's augmentic fingers twitched when he spoke of heresy. The pattern of wear on the lead inquisitor's armor, suggesting decades of active service. The faces in the gallery, some sympathetic, most coldly judgmental. I opened my eyes with a start. That had not been memory. It had been too detailed, too comprehensive. Had I fallen asleep without realizing it? How long had I been lying here? I sat up, noting that the light from the small window had not changed. Still evening. Perhaps only minutes had passed despite what felt like an hour of restless memory. A soft knock at the door preceded its opening. A Sister Hospitaller entered, carrying a tray. She was young, perhaps 30 years in the order, her face showing the careful neutrality of someone serving one who might be condemned. "You must eat, Canoness," she said, setting the tray on the small table. "The tribunal reconvenes tomorrow. You will need your strength." The tray held nutrient wafers and a cup of water. Simple fare, appropriate for one whose status remained uncertain. I should have been hungry after the long day, but found myself strangely without appetite. "What time is it?" I asked. The Hospitaller glanced at a chrono built into her sleeve. "Approaching the 20th hour. You have been in your cell for 3 hours since the tribunal recessed." 3 hours? It felt like minutes. I looked at my hands, noting they appeared exactly as they had when I entered the cell. No stiffness from prayer, no marks from kneeling on the hard floor. Yet I remembered praying, remembered lying down, remembered the strange, too vivid vision of the tribunal. "Are you well, Canoness?" the Hospitaller asked. "You seem disoriented." "I am tired," I replied, forcing myself to take a nutrient wafer and bite into it. The taste was correct, the texture familiar, but the act of eating felt oddly distant, as if I was watching someone else consume food rather than doing it myself. The Hospitaller watched me for a moment longer, then nodded. "I will return in the morning to prepare you for the second day of tribunal. The Emperor protects." She departed before I could respond. The door sealed with a pneumatic hiss that seemed too loud in the small space. I looked at the half-eaten wafer in my hand, trying to remember the act of bringing it to my mouth. The memory was there but felt wrong, like reading about an action rather than performing it. I forced myself to finish the meal, drinking the water in careful sips. My body accepted the sustenance without complaint, my enhanced digestive system processing it efficiently. Yet I felt no satisfaction from eating, no sense of physical need being met. The food simply disappeared, and I continued existing in the same state as before. I returned to the cot and lay down again, determined to find proper sleep. My body needed rest, even if my mind refused to quiet. I closed my eyes and began the calming exercises taught to all Adepta Sororitas. Techniques for finding peace, even in the midst of battle or crisis. Instead of peace, I found myself standing in the tribunal hall, not remembering it, but present within it. The judges sat in their elevated positions. The gallery was full of observers, and I was in the wooden chair, listening to Sister Dominica describe my tactical failures. But this was wrong. This testimony had already happened. I had lived through this, yet here I was, experiencing it again, but from a different perspective. I could see my own face from the outside, see the barely controlled frustration as I listened to my decisions being dissected and condemned. I tried to speak, to call out that this was memory, not reality, but my voice would not obey. I was trapped in observation, watching the scene play out exactly as it had hours before. Sister Dominica concluded her testimony. The Inquisitor thanked her. She departed through the side door. Then Canoness Commander Palmyra entered, and I was suddenly back in my body, in the chair, experiencing the testimony from my original perspective. Her words cut through me again, each sentence a betrayal wrapped in duty. Her reframing of my compassion as latent heresy struck with fresh impact, despite my knowledge that I had heard this before. I jolted back to awareness in my cell, gasping. The disorientation was profound. Had I been asleep? The window showed the same evening light as before. Had no time passed? Or had hours gone by while I was lost in recursive memory? I stood and moved to the window, looking out at the fortress complex. The position of shadows suggested late evening, consistent with the time the Hospitaller had stated, but I had no internal sense of how long I had been lying on the cot. Minutes? Hours? The gap in my awareness was frightening. I examined my body carefully, searching for signs of what might be wrong. My hands responded normally to commands. My enhanced musculature showed no signs of degradation or weakness. My heartbeat was steady, my breathing unlabored. By all physical measures, I was healthy. Yet something was profoundly wrong with my consciousness, my sense of time and presence. I knelt before the shrine again, seeking answers through prayer. The words came more slowly this time, each phrase requiring conscious effort to form. I prayed for clarity. I prayed for strength. I prayed for the Emperor's guidance through whatever trial awaited me. The prayers felt like they were traveling a vast distance, diminishing with each meter until they faded into nothing long before reaching any destination. The connection I had always taken for granted was gone, or perhaps had never truly existed. How could anyone know if their prayers were heard or if faith was simply a story we told ourselves to make service bearable? The doubt itself was terrifying. In 137 years of service, I had never questioned the reality of the Emperor's presence. I had felt him in moments of battle clarity, in the strength that came when all seemed lost, in the rightness of purpose that sustained me through horrors that would break unaugmented humans. Or had I simply interpreted adrenaline and enhanced physiology and psychological conditioning as divine presence? I pushed the thoughts away, recognizing them as symptoms of stress rather than genuine spiritual crisis. I was exhausted. I was under immense pressure. These circumstances would test anyone's faith. Once the tribunal concluded, once I was vindicated or at least given clear path forward, these doubts would fade. I returned to the cot and closed my eyes once more, determined to find rest. This time I found myself in a different memory. The Ophelia Secundus shrine, standing before the 17 children. The girl with the Aquila sign, looking up at me with desperate hope. Sister Dominica's voice on the Vox recommending elimination of contamination vectors. The moment of choice that had led to everything that followed. But the memory was wrong. Details were different. The girl's face kept shifting, sometimes matching my recollection, sometimes transforming into something other. The shrine's walls pulsed with corruption I had not noticed during the actual mission. When I looked at my sisters, their armor bore marks of censure and judgment that had not been present. I was not remembering. I was experiencing a distorted version of events, my mind warping the past to reflect my current psychological state. The realization brought fresh horror. If I could not trust my own memories, what did I have left? My entire defense rested on the certainty that I had acted righteously. But certainty required accurate recollection, and my recollection was becoming unreliable. I forced my eyes open again, gasping. The cell was darker now. True night had fallen while I was lost in fractured memory. How much time had passed? Hours, certainly, but I had no sense of it. The gap between lying down and this moment was a void in my awareness. I sat up and immediately felt wrong. My body moved correctly, but the sensation of movement was delayed, as if I was puppeting myself from a distance. I raised my hand before my face, watching fingers flex and curl. The commands came from my brain. The hand obeyed, but the feedback loop felt stretched, attenuated. Terror began to creep through my thoughts. Something was fundamentally wrong with my consciousness. This was not exhaustion or stress. This was something else, something that explained the time gaps and distorted memories and strange sense of disconnection from my own body. I tried to stand and found my legs would not fully support me. I collapsed back onto the cot, my enhanced strength and coordination failing for reasons I could not comprehend. I attempted to call out for help, to summon the guards or the hospitaller, but my voice emerged as barely a whisper, weak and thready. Panic surged through me, and with it came a moment of absolute clarity. The hospitaller, the meal she had brought. Had there been something in the water, in the nutrient wafers? Had I been drugged? The possibility struck with the force of revelation. This was not spiritual crisis or psychological breakdown. I had been given something, some substance to make me compliant, docile, barely conscious during my own judgment. The Ecclesiarchy was ensuring I could not properly defend myself, could not articulate arguments or challenge their predetermined conclusions. I tried to remember consuming the meal, but the memory was indistinct, blurred. Had I actually eaten, or had I been drugged before that, given something that made me believe I had eaten while the substance took hold? My thoughts began to spiral, each question branching into others. What was real? What was drugged hallucination? How long had I actually been in this cell? The hospitaller had said 3 hours, but was that true? Had it been days? Weeks? I looked down at my body again. My armor was gone. When had that happened? I was wearing simple robes, prisoner's garments. I remembered being dressed in full ceremonial armor at the tribunal. Surely someone had removed it. Surely I would remember such an intimate violation. But I did not. The armor's absence was simply a fact I had not noticed until this moment. The horror crystallized into terrible understanding. I was not fully present in my own experience. I was trapped in some liminal state between consciousness and unconsciousness. Aware enough to perceive, but unable to fully interact with reality. The trial was happening to me, but I was observing it from behind layers of chemical suppression. I tried to fight it, to force my enhanced physiology to metabolize whatever substance they had given me. Adepta sororitas were resistant to most toxins and drugs. Our enhanced organs and purification systems could cleanse our blood of impurities that would kill normal humans. Whatever they had given me should have been processed and expelled, unless it was not a simple drug, unless it was something designed specifically to affect Adepta Sororitas physiology. The Ecclesiarchy had access to such substances, compounds used in extreme cases when even battle sisters needed to be controlled. I had heard rumors of such things, but never expected to experience them myself. I was meant to be docile during my judgment, compliant, barely aware. The tribunal was not seeking truth but performing ritual. My presence was required, but my participation was not desired. They wanted a symbol to condemn, not a person to defend herself. And I was trapped, conscious enough to understand what was being done to me, but unable to prevent it. Aware enough to witness my own damnation, but powerless to speak against it. A soft moan escaped my lips, the only sound I could produce. The cell's walls seemed to pulse and breathe around me. The shrine to the Emperor wavered like a reflection on water. I could not tell what was real and what was drug-induced distortion. I tried once more to pray, but the words dissolved before they could form. My thoughts were becoming sluggish, consciousness fading despite my desperate attempts to maintain it. I was slipping under again, into that state where I existed but did not fully experience, where time became meaningless and memory became unreliable. My last coherent thought before the darkness claimed me was a question that would haunt whatever remained of my awareness. How long had I actually been awake, and how much of what I remembered was real? Then nothing. Not sleep, not unconsciousness, simply absence, a void where my awareness should have been. Awareness returned in fragments, incomplete pieces of consciousness that assembled themselves into something almost resembling coherent thought. I was standing. When had I stood? The last memory was of collapsing onto the cot, unable to support my own weight. Now I was vertical, my legs bearing my weight without apparent effort. Yet I had no recollection of the transition. The tribunal hall surrounded me. I recognized the soaring ceiling, the statues of saints holding their scales and swords, the elevated platform where the judges sat in silent observation. But something was wrong with the scene. The details flickered, shifting between states like a picked feed with damaged transmission. Sometimes the hall was full of observers, the gallery packed with ecclesiastical officials. Sometimes it was empty, except for the judges and myself. The light changed without transition. Bright cathedral illumination becoming dim evening gloom and back again. I tried to speak, to ask what was happening, but my voice would not obey. My mouth moved, I felt my lips form words, but no sound emerged. Or perhaps sound emerged and I simply could not hear it. The disconnect between intention and action was profound and terrifying. Cardinal Severus was speaking. His voice reached me as if through water, distorted and distant. I caught fragments of sentences, pieces of condemnation that assembled themselves into meaning through effort. Excessive compassion demonstrates fundamental weakness, corruption of purpose. I wanted to object, to defend myself, but my body would not respond to commands. I was trapped in observation, a passenger in my own flesh. This had happened before, I remembered. Or was I remembering? Or was this the first time? The sequence of events refused to organize itself properly in my mind. The scene shifted without transition. Now, I was in my cell, kneeling before the shrine. My hands were clasped in prayer position, my lips moving through familiar litanies. But I had no memory of returning here, no sense of time passing between the tribunal hall and this moment. Had hours passed? Days? The gap in awareness yawned like an abyss. I tried to focus on the prayer, to use the familiar words as anchor to reality. But even as I recited them, they felt wrong in my mouth. The language was correct, but the meaning had drained away, leaving only empty sounds. I prayed to the Emperor but felt nothing, no presence, no connection. only vast emptiness where faith had once resided. Another shift. I was sitting in the wooden chair in the tribunal hall, but the perspective was wrong. I could see myself from the outside, as if floating above and behind my own body. My face showed strain barely contained, jaw tight, eyes focused on the judges with desperate intensity. When had my expression become so obviously defensive? I had maintained composure, I was certain. Yet here, I watched myself displaying weakness for all to see. Sister Agatha stood at the testimony lectern. Her voice came clearly now, each word precise and damning. She prioritized civilian extraction over tactical completion. She made emotional decisions that compromised operational security. I tried to shout that she was removing context, that the full situation was more complex. My viewpoint suddenly slammed back into my body, experiencing the tribunal from inside my own skull again. My mouth opened but produced only a soft groan, insufficient to carry across the vast hall. The judges did not react. Perhaps I had made no sound at all. Perhaps I had shouted, and they simply chose not to acknowledge it. Time fractured again. I was being escorted down a corridor by stormtroopers. My arms held firmly, but not painfully. When had the tribunal recessed? What had I missed during the gaps in my consciousness? The stormtroopers' faces were expressionless behind their visors, offering no clues to what had transpired. We entered a preparation chamber I did not recognize. Sister Hospitallers waited there, their faces showing practiced neutrality. One approached with a hypo sprayer, pressing it against my neck before I could react. Cool liquid dispersed under my skin, spreading through my system with chemical efficiency. "For the peace of judgment," she said softly. "So you need not suffer the weight of condemnation while it is delivered. The Emperor's peace," they called it. A blessed mercy for those being sentenced, dulling awareness so the condemned could face their fate without full comprehension of horror. But I was not yet sentenced. The tribunal was still ongoing. Why were they administering this now? I tried to ask, but found my tongue thick and unresponsive. The drug was already taking effect, faster than my enhanced physiology could process it. They had calculated the dosage precisely, knowing exactly how much was needed to suppress an adepta sororitas without inducing full unconsciousness. The chamber wavered around me. The Hospitallers' faces elongated and compressed, their features becoming fluid. I knew this was chemical distortion of perception, but knowing did nothing to stop it. Reality was becoming negotiable, my senses unreliable. Another temporal discontinuity. I was back in the tribunal hall, but everything had changed. My armor was gone. I wore penitent's rags, rough cloth that scratched against skin I could barely feel. When had this happened? The armor's removal should have been a significant event, a ritual, stripping of honor and rank. I had no memory of it. The lead inquisitor was reading from a document, her voice amplified to godlike proportions. And having considered all testimony and evidence, this tribunal finds the accused guilty of doctrinal deviation, dereliction of sacred duty, and corruption of purpose through excessive sentiment. Guilty. The word echoed through the hall, through my drugged consciousness, settling into my bones like poison. I was guilty. They had decided. When had they deliberated? I remembered recess being called, but not the tribunal reconvening. Hours or days of judgment had occurred in gaps my awareness could not bridge. I tried to stand, to protest, to demand the right to speak in my own defense. My body swayed but remained seated, my legs refusing commands. The judges watched with expressions of cold satisfaction. This was what they wanted. A symbol too drugged to resist, too compromised to defend herself. The accused will be marked with signs of excommunication, the inquisitor continued. Stripped of rank, honor, and the Emperor's grace, cast out from the adepta sororitas and the protection of holy terra. Hands seized my arms, pulling me upright. I could not tell if they were stormtroopers or hospitallers or some other functionaries. their faces blurred together, becoming indistinguishable from one another. They dragged me forward, my feet dragging uselessly, toward a platform I had not noticed before. The platform held instruments I recognized from historical texts: branding irons, ink needles, surgical tools designed for marking flesh with permanent symbols of shame. They were going to excommunicate me now, in this moment, while I was too drugged to fully experience it. Part of me felt relief. If I was not fully conscious, perhaps I would not remember the horror. Perhaps the mercy of chemical suppression would spare me the complete psychological trauma of witnessing my own damnation. But another part, some core of myself that remained aware despite the drugs, screamed in silent protest. This was wrong. This violated every principle I had been taught. The accused should face judgment fully conscious, fully aware, able to defend themselves and accept their fate with dignity. To be drugged into compliance was to be denied even the honor of facing condemnation with courage. I felt cold metal against my left arm, a branding iron heated to precise temperature to scar without causing excessive damage. The pain should have been excruciating, but I felt it as distant pressure. Sensation filtered through layers of chemical suppression. I watched the skin blister and blacken, watched the symbol of excommunication burn itself into my flesh, and felt almost nothing. Another shift. I was in my cell again, lying on the cot. My arm throbbed with delayed pain, the drugs wearing off enough to allow physical sensation through. I raised it with trembling effort and saw the mark clearly. The symbol of excommunication, black against pale skin, stark and permanent. When had they returned me here? What had happened between the branding and this moment? The gaps were becoming wider, consuming more and more of my experience. I was conscious for only fragments now, brief windows of awareness separated by vast periods of nothing. I tried to sit up and failed. My enhanced strength had abandoned me, or perhaps the drugs were still suppressing my nervous system's ability to properly command my muscles. I lay paralyzed, staring at the ceiling, trying to assemble the fragments of experience into coherent narrative. The tribunal had found me guilty. I remembered that much. They had marked me with excommunication. I had witnessed it happening to my own body. But the sequence felt wrong, incomplete. Surely there should have been more ceremony, more formality. Excommunication was not a simple matter of branding and dismissal. There were rituals, pronouncements, final opportunities for repentance and redemption. Unless those had occurred during the gaps, unless I had been present in body while my consciousness was suppressed, going through the motions of some dark liturgy without awareness or memory of it. The horror of that possibility was profound. What had I said or done while the drugs controlled me? Had I confessed to crimes I did not commit? Had I begged for mercy or maintained dignity? I could not know. And the not knowing was almost worse than any definite knowledge could be. The door opened. A hospitaller entered, different from the previous ones, or perhaps the same. I could not tell. She carried a tray with water and nutrient paste. She set it beside the cot without meeting my eyes. "You must maintain your strength," she said. Final options. The phrase suggested I had not yet been fully sentenced, that some choice remained. But how could that be, if I had already been marked? Or was the marking preliminary, a deterrent meant to show me what awaited if I did not comply with whatever they demanded? "How long?" I managed to whisper, my voice barely functional. "How long have I been here?" The hospitaller paused, something like pity flickering across her face. 3 days since the tribunal began. You wake more than we expected. Your physiology resists the peace more strongly than anticipated. 3 days, 72 hours reduced to scattered fragments of consciousness, adding up to perhaps a few hours of actual awareness. I had lost days of my life to chemical suppression. had witnessed my own judgment in pieces too incomplete to fully comprehend. "The Emperor," I began, not knowing how to finish the question. "Can still hear you," the Hospitaller said softly. "If he chooses. Excommunication severs you from the Ecclesiarchy, not from him, though whether he listens to the excommunicated is a matter of faith." She departed before I could respond, leaving me with water I could not lift and questions I could not answer. I lay in the gathering darkness, consciousness already fading again despite my desperate attempts to maintain it, slipping back into that void where time and experience became meaningless. My last thought before the drugs pulled me under was a terrible certainty. I was no longer experiencing my own life. I was observing fragments of it from behind a veil that grew thicker with each passing moment. The excommunication was not just stripping away my rank and honor. It was erasing my very presence in my own existence. Then, nothing again. The familiar absence that had become my primary state of being. I woke fully for the first time in what felt like eternity. Not the partial awareness that had characterized the previous days. Not the fragmented consciousness that slipped through my fingers like smoke. But genuine, complete wakefulness. My mind felt clear, sharp, no longer wrapped in the suffocating embrace of chemical suppression. The clarity itself was frightening. After days of drugged confusion, the sudden return of coherent thought felt almost like violation, as if some barrier protecting me from full understanding had been stripped away. I could think now. I could remember. And that meant I had to confront everything that had happened, without the mercy of pharmaceutical distance. I sat up slowly, testing my body's responses. My muscles obeyed commands properly for the first time since the tribunal began. My enhanced strength had returned, the augmentations gifted by my transformation into Adepta Sororitas functioning as they should. I raised my left arm and examined the excommunication mark in the cell's dim light. The brand had healed with the accelerated rate my physiology provided, leaving a permanent black scar that would mark me for the remainder of my life. The cell was exactly as I remembered from my fragmented moments of consciousness. Bare stone walls, a simple cot, a small shrine to the Emperor consisting of nothing more than an iron aquila mounted on the wall. The window showed morning light, pale and cold. I moved to the shrine and knelt before it, needing the ritual of prayer to ground myself in reality. My hands assumed the proper position automatically, muscle memory from over a century of devotion. I opened my mouth to begin the morning litanies, the prayers I had recited every day since my induction into the order. The words would not come, not because of drugs or physical impediment, but because something fundamental had changed within me. I knew the prayers, could recite them from memory without effort, but they felt hollow in my mouth, empty sounds without meaning or power. I forced myself to speak them anyway, to push through the spiritual numbness. The Emperor protects. His light guides us through darkness. His strength sustains us in weakness. But even as I spoke, a terrible question formed in my mind. Did the Emperor actually protect? I had served faithfully for 137 years, had killed in his name, had maintained absolute devotion through horrors that would shatter normal humans. And my reward was excommunication, condemnation by the very institutions claiming to speak for him. The doubt itself was terrifying, more frightening than any enemy I had faced in combat. For an Adepta Sororitas, faith was not simply belief but the foundation of existence. Without it, we were nothing but women in armor, transhuman strength and conditioning without divine purpose. I had always believed the Emperor's presence was real, that my prayers reached him, that my service mattered in some cosmic sense. Now I wondered if it had all been elaborate conditioning, psychological programming designed to create perfectly loyal servants. The Schola Progenium took children and shaped them into weapons wrapped in faith. How much of my certainty had been genuine spiritual connection, and how much had been indoctrination so complete I could not distinguish it from true belief. I tried to pray again, seeking that sense of presence I had always associated with devotion. I found only silence. Either the Emperor was not listening, or he had never listened, or my excommunication had truly severed the connection. Each possibility was its own form of damnation. I stood and moved to examine my body more thoroughly. Besides the excommunication brand, I found other marks I did not remember receiving. Small scars on my wrists and ankles where restraints had been attached. A needle puncture on my neck from repeated drug administrations. My hair had been cut short, roughly, without care for appearance. My fingernails were torn, as if I had clawed at something during unconscious periods. What had I done during the lost days? What had my body experienced while my consciousness was suppressed? The physical evidence suggested struggles I could not remember, resistance I had offered without awareness. My enhanced physiology had fought the drugs even while my mind surrendered to them. I examined my arms more closely and found something that made my blood run cold. Marks on my right forearm, scratches that formed letters. I had carved words into my own flesh with my fingernails, some desperate message from my drugged self to my conscious self. The letters were crude, barely legible, but I could make them out with effort. I stared at the message, trying to understand what my unconscious self had been trying to communicate. What was not real? The tribunal, the excommunication, my faith itself, and what was I supposed to remember and fight against? The door opened without warning. I turned, instinctively adopting a defensive stance despite my lack of weapons or armor. A figure entered, not a stormtrooper or hospitaller, but someone I recognized, Chaplain Seraphine, who had warned me days ago to show penitence and recant. She wore her full ceremonial armor, black with silver trim, a rosarius identical to the one that had been taken from me hanging from her neck. Her face was stern but not unkind, showing the weathered features of someone who had served the order for perhaps 2 centuries. "Canoness Melodia," she said, then corrected herself. "Forgive me. Simply Melodia now. The rank has been stripped." I said nothing, waiting for her to reveal the purpose of this visit. She moved to stand beside the shrine, her armored form casting long shadows in the morning light. "The drugs have been discontinued. You will face the remainder of your judgment fully conscious." This was decided after consultation with the Inquisition and senior Ecclesiarchy officials. "Why?" I asked, my voice rough from disuse. "Why drug me at all, if the intention was always to have me conscious for sentencing?" Seraphine's expression softened slightly. "Because we hoped you would be compliant, docile, that you would accept judgment without resistance and move quickly to whatever fate the tribunal assigned. But your enhanced physiology fought the peace more effectively than anticipated. You woke during proceedings that should have passed over you in merciful unconsciousness. The decision was made to discontinue suppression rather than risk permanent damage to your cognitive functions." "How considerate," I said, unable to keep bitterness from my voice. "It was mercy," Seraphine replied firmly. "You do not understand what was being spared you. To be fully conscious during excommunication is agony beyond physical pain. It is the tearing of the soul from its moorings. We sought to protect you from that. By denying me the ability to defend myself? By stripping away my awareness during my own judgment? By showing compassion even to one who had fallen?" Seraphine moved closer, her eyes searching my face. "Melodia, I have come to offer you a path. You have been judged and found guilty of doctrinal deviation. This cannot be undone. But how you proceed from this point determines whether you die damned or find redemption." I forced myself to remain calm, to listen despite my anger. "What path?" "Repentance, complete and absolute. You must confess your sins before the assembled order. You must acknowledge that your compassion was weakness, that your mercy was corruption, that your judgment was flawed. You must accept that in saving those children, you committed heresy against the Emperor's true will." The words hit like physical blows. You want me to lie, to confess to crimes I do not believe I committed. I want you to survive, Seraphine said urgently, with your soul intact. The path of the Repentia is harsh, but it offers redemption. You would serve in the suicide squads, fighting without armor, seeking death in service to the Emperor. Most Repentia die within their first campaign, but some survive long enough to earn forgiveness. Some are eventually restored to the sisterhood, their sins cleansed through blood and sacrifice. And if I refuse to confess? Seraphine's expression hardened. Then your options become limited. Arco-flagellation, where you are lobotomized and transformed into a combat servitor, your body serving long after your mind has been destroyed. Execution, clean and final, with no chance of redemption. Or exile, cast out into the Imperium with nothing, to die slowly and alone. I moved to the window, looking out at the fortress complex. Dawn was breaking fully now, light spreading across the Gothic architecture. Somewhere in this complex, my former sisters were preparing for their daily duties, training, praying, serving with the absolute certainty I had once possessed. The children I saved, I said without turning. In the Schola Progenium, being raised to serve the Imperium. So they live because I chose mercy. 12 lives that would have been extinguished if I had followed strict protocol. 12 lives that exist as constant reminders of your disobedience, Seraphine replied. Every day they draw breath is evidence of your deviation from doctrine. I turned to face her. Then I am glad of my disobedience. Those children deserved life. They deserved the chance to serve the Emperor. If saving them is heresy, then the definition of heresy is flawed. Seraphine's face showed genuine distress now. You do not understand what you are saying. To claim that doctrine itself is wrong is to place yourself above the Ecclesiarchy, above the accumulated wisdom of 10,000 years. This is the very essence of pride, the sin that damned Horus himself. Horus sought godhood and power, I countered. I sought to protect the innocent. These are not equivalent. Both represent the belief that personal judgment supersedes established authority. Both begin with the conviction that I know better. From that seed grows every heresy that has ever threatened the Imperium. I felt the argument circling back on itself. The same logic that had condemned me at the tribunal. Individual conscience was dangerous because it was individual. Only absolute obedience to institutional authority could guarantee purity. Any deviation, no matter how well-intentioned, represented potential corruption. If the Ecclesiarchy can excommunicate me from the Emperor's grace, I said slowly, working through the theology, then they claim power over my soul itself. They assert that connection to him flows only through their institutions. But what if that claim is false? What if faith can exist independently of the structures built around it? That is heresy, Seraphine said flatly. The Ecclesiarchy is the Emperor's voice in the Imperium. To reject it is to reject him. Or perhaps the Ecclesiarchy is a human institution, flawed and fallible like all human creations. Perhaps it serves an important function, but is not identical with the Emperor himself. Seraphine stepped back as if I had struck her. You stand in a cell facing excommunication, and still you persist in this arrogance. Melodia, I am trying to save you. If you continue down this path, there is no redemption, only damnation. Then I am already damned, I replied. Because I will not lie. I will not confess to sins I do not believe I committed. Those children deserved mercy, and I was right to grant it. If that places me beyond the Ecclesiarchy's forgiveness, you are choosing pride over survival. I am choosing integrity over compliance. Seraphine moved to the door, her face a mask of controlled disappointment. Inquisitor Covenant will visit you tomorrow. He will present your final options formally. I pray you will reconsider before then. The path you are choosing leads only to destruction. She departed, the door sealing behind her with pneumatic finality. I was alone again with my thoughts and my doubts and the terrible clarity that had replaced the drugged confusion. I returned to the shrine and knelt once more, not to pray in the traditional sense, but to think through what I believed. If the Ecclesiarchy could excommunicate me from the Emperor's grace, did that mean my faith was always conditional, subject to institutional approval? Or was there something deeper, some connection that existed independently of earthly authority? I spoke to the Emperor directly, without ritual or formula. If you exist, if you truly watch over humanity, then you know I acted righteously. The Ecclesiarchy condemns me, but do you? I saved your faithful. I showed mercy to the innocent. If this is wrong by their measure, is it wrong by yours? No answer came. The silence was complete. But somehow I found peace in that silence. If the Emperor was real and just, he would judge me by my actions and intentions, not by institutional decree. And if he was not real, if faith was simply human construction, then I was free to define my own morality based on what I believed was right. Either way, I would not bend. I would not confess to crimes I had not committed. I would not accept that mercy was weakness or that compassion was corruption. The excommunication had stripped away my rank and honor, but it had also freed me from the need to reconcile my conscience with institutional demands. I was damned by their measure. Very well. I would carry that damnation with integrity rather than seek redemption through lies. I examined the scratched message on my arm again. Not real. Remember, fight. I understood now. My drugged self had been trying to warn me that the tribunal's authority over my soul was not real, that I should remember my true purpose and fight to maintain it despite their judgment. Even in chemical suppression, some core of myself had recognized the truth. Institutions could condemn me, but they could not actually separate me from whatever divine connection existed unless I allowed them to. Tomorrow, Inquisitor Covenant would come with formal options: repentia, servitor, execution, or exile. Each path led to destruction, but the manner of destruction varied. I would have to choose which form of damnation I could accept. But tonight, in the clarity of full consciousness, I simply existed. Neither faithful nor faithless, neither redeemed nor damned. Simply a woman who had acted according to her conscience and would face the consequences without surrender. The Emperor protects, the old litany claimed. Perhaps he did. Perhaps he protected not through institutional authority but through the strength to maintain integrity in the face of condemnation. Or perhaps he did not protect at all, and faith was simply the story we told ourselves to make service bearable. Either way, I would face tomorrow on my own terms, fully conscious and uncompromising. Inquisitor Covenant arrived precisely at dawn, his timing calculated to demonstrate institutional control, even over such minor matters as visitation schedules. I was kneeling before the shrine when the door opened, not in prayer but in meditation, trying to prepare myself for whatever came next. He entered alone, without stormtroopers or witnesses, which suggested this conversation was meant to be more negotiation than formal proceeding. He carried a data slate in one hand, and his plasma pistol remained holstered at his hip. His face showed the same cold efficiency I remembered from our first meeting, the expression of a man who saw humans as problems to be solved rather than souls to be saved. "You are fully conscious," he observed, taking a position near the door. "Good. What follows requires your complete understanding." I stood, facing him without the deference I might once have shown. Excommunication had stripped away the need for such performance. Chaplain Seraphine explained my options: repentia, servitor, execution, or exile. I assume you are here to formalize the choice. "I am here to ensure you understand the full implications of each path," Covenant replied. He activated the data slate, its screen casting pale light across his angular features. "The tribunal has concluded. You have been found guilty of doctrinal deviation, dereliction of duty, and elevation of personal judgment above institutional authority. The excommunication is absolute and irrevocable. What remains is determining your final disposition. Disposition, I repeated, as if I were equipment being reassigned. You are a resource whose utility must be maximized, even in failure, he said, without apparent irony. The Imperium wastes nothing, especially not transhuman warriors whose creation required immense investment. Your body, your training, your enhanced physiology, all of these retain value regardless of your spiritual corruption. The casual cruelty of the statement was almost impressive. I had ceased to be a person in their calculation, had become merely a collection of useful components whose optimal reallocation needed to be determined. Explain the options in detail, I said. I will not make this choice based on incomplete information. Covenant nodded, scrolling through the data slate. Option 1. The path of the repentia. You would confess your sins publicly before the assembled order. You would accept full responsibility for doctrinal deviation and beg forgiveness from the Emperor through the Ecclesiarchy. Following this, you would be inducted into a repentia squad. He looked up from the slate. Repentia are given no armor, only eviscerators and neural whips wielded by their mistress. They are deployed in the most dangerous situations, expected to seek death in service as penance. Most survive less than 3 campaigns. However, those who survive long enough and demonstrate sufficient penitence may eventually be restored to limited positions within the order. Full rank and honor cannot be reclaimed, but you could serve again as a sister, albeit under permanent scrutiny. And if I refuse to confess, then this option is closed to you. The path of the repentia requires absolute admission of guilt. You cannot seek redemption for sins you claim not to have committed. I nodded slowly. Option 2? Arco-flagellation, Covenant said, his tone unchanged. You would be subjected to lobotomization, removing higher cognitive functions while preserving combat reflexes and physical capabilities. Your body would be augmented with additional weapons systems and pain engines that stimulate aggression. You would become an arco-flagellant, a combat servitor deployed in close assault situations. You would erase my mind, I said flatly. Destroy everything that makes me who I am. We would eliminate the corrupted consciousness while preserving the useful physical components. Your body would serve the Emperor faithfully for decades, perhaps longer depending on maintenance quality. This option has the advantage of guaranteeing continued utility without risk of further doctrinal deviation. The clinical description of my own destruction was surreal. He spoke of erasing my consciousness, as if discussing the replacement of faulty equipment. Nothing in his tone suggested he saw this as horrific, merely as one practical option among several. Option 3? I asked, my voice carefully controlled. Execution. Simple, final, clean. A bolt round to the head. Your gene seed harvested for future implantation. Your body committed to the flames. This offers no chance of redemption or continued service, but it is dignified by imperial standards. You would die as yourself, not as a mindless weapon or penitent seeker of death. And option 4? Covenant's expression shifted slightly, showing what might have been curiosity. Exile. You would be stripped of all equipment, given minimal supplies, and cast out beyond imperial territory. No communication, no support, no possibility of return. You would die in the wilderness, alone and unmourned. Your final fate, unknown to the Imperium you once served. He paused, studying me. This is the option no one chooses. Execution is preferable, because it is faster. The repentia path offers hope of redemption. Even arco-flagellation guarantees your body serves. But exile, you simply cease to matter. You become nothing, forgotten by the institutions you devoted your life to serving. Yet it is offered as an option, I observed. Why? Because the law requires it. In cases of doctrinal deviation without evidence of chaos, corruption, the accused must be offered exile as alternative to execution. It is an ancient provision, dating back to the reforms after the age of apostasy. The theory is that those whose faith is genuine but misdirected might find their own path to the emperor outside institutional structures. And in practice, no one survives exile long enough for it to matter. Those cast out die within weeks, if not days. The galaxy beyond imperial borders is hostile beyond measure, without armor, weapons, or support. Even an Adeptus Sororitas cannot survive indefinitely. Covenant deactivated the data slate and set it aside. These are your options, Melodia. You have until midday to decide. I will return then for your answer. Wait, I said as he moved toward the door. Why do you care which I choose? If all paths lead to my removal from the Order, what difference does it make to the Inquisition? He paused, turning back. Because your choice reveals the nature of your corruption. If you choose repentia, it suggests your deviation was temporary, correctable through sufficient penance. If you choose execution, it suggests pride but also resignation. If you choose arco-flagellation, he smiled without warmth. No one chooses that willingly. It would have to be imposed. And exile suggests you reject the Ecclesiarchy's authority entirely, that you believe yourself capable of maintaining faith independent of institutional guidance. This is the most dangerous form of deviation because it cannot be corrected. It is a permanent rejection of the structures that bind the Imperium together. I understood then. They were not simply disposing of a failed asset. They were using my choice as data point. Evidence for whatever theories the Inquisition maintained about the nature and progression of doctrinal corruption. My damnation would be studied, analyzed, incorporated into their understanding of how faith failed. I will have my answer by midday, I said. Covenant nodded and departed, the door sealing behind him. I was alone with the most consequential decision I would ever make. I spent the next hours examining each option from every angle, trying to determine which path aligned with whatever remained of my principles. The repentia path required lies. I would have to confess that saving the children was wrong, that mercy was weakness, that I should have followed protocol regardless of conscience. This violated everything I believed, but it offered the possibility, however slim, of eventual restoration. I could serve again. I could fight for humanity again. Was that worth compromising my integrity? I thought of the 12 children in the Schola Progenium, alive because I had chosen compassion. If I confessed my choice was wrong, I would be retroactively condemning them, declaring their lives valueless compared to absolute obedience. I could not do that. Whatever else I might surrender, I would not betray them that way. Arco-flagellation was not truly a choice. It was obliteration, the destruction of everything that made me human. My body would continue functioning, but I would be gone, replaced by aggressive programming and pain responses. This was damnation in its purest form, the death of the soul while the flesh persisted. I could not choose that. Even if Covenant was correct that no one willingly chose it, I needed to at least consider it honestly. And, in honest consideration, I rejected it absolutely. If I was to be destroyed, let it be quick and complete, not lingering as a mockery of what I had been. Execution was clean, final. It offered dignity in the manner of death. A bolt round administered by an officer of the Inquisition. My gene seed harvested so that future battle sisters might benefit from my genetic legacy. I would die as myself, conscious and coherent, facing death without drugged suppression. There was honor in that, by imperial standards. A good death in service, even if the service was merely providing genetic material for successors. My name would be stricken from records, but my gene seed would continue. Some fragment of what I had been would persist in future generations of the Order. This option called to me strongly. It was escape, release from the impossible situation I found myself in. No more struggling with faith that had become uncertain. No more carrying the weight of institutional condemnation. Just ending. Quick and merciful. But it was also surrender. Acceptance of their judgment. By choosing execution, I would be agreeing that I deserved death, that my deviation was so complete that elimination was the only appropriate response. The Ecclesiarchy would have won. Not just practically, but philosophically. They would have broken me so completely that I sought death rather than continue existing outside their approval, which left exile. I moved to the window and looked out at the fortress complex, trying to imagine what lay beyond. The galaxy was vast and hostile. Orcs, Dark Eldar, Tyranids, Chaos forces, all waiting to prey on the weak and isolated. An Adepta Sororitas without armor or weapons would be vulnerable in ways I had never experienced. I would die. Covenant was correct about that. Perhaps not immediately. Perhaps I would survive days or even weeks through enhanced physiology and training. But eventually, something would kill me. Exposure, starvation, or, more likely, some Xenos predator that found lone human easy prey. Yet exile offered something the other options did not. Defiance. By choosing exile, I would be rejecting their authority completely. Not accepting their judgment. Not seeking redemption through their structures. Not allowing them to determine the manner of my death. I would be walking away from the Imperium itself, declaring through action that I could exist independently of the institutions, claiming to mediate between humanity and the Emperor. It was the choice that frightened them most. Covenant had revealed that, because it represented something they could not control or predict. A failed servant who refused to be processed through their systems of correction and disposal. I thought about the message scratched on my arm. Not real. Remember, fight. My drugged self had understood something my conscious mind was still grasping toward. The Ecclesiarchy's power over my soul was not real unless I accepted it as real. They could excommunicate me from their structures, but they could not actually sever my connection to the Emperor unless I believed they could. And I no longer believed they could. Over 137 years, I had developed a relationship with faith that transcended the rituals and hierarchies. I had prayed in moments when death seemed certain and found strength. I had witnessed miracles, small and large, that suggested something beyond human understanding was present in the universe. Whether that something was truly the Emperor or simply some pattern in reality that humans interpreted as divine, it existed independently of ecclesiarchal approval. They could not take that from me. They could only make me believe they had taken it. The decision crystallized with sudden clarity. I would choose exile, not because I expected to survive, but because it was the only path that maintained integrity. I would die on my own terms. Carrying faith the Ecclesiarchy could not touch because it was never truly theirs to give or take. When Covenant returned at midday, I was ready. I choose exile, I said, before he could speak. His expression showed genuine surprise, quickly masked. You understand this means certain death? That you will die alone, unmourned, forgotten by the Imperium? I understand perfectly. And you still choose this path over the others? I choose to walk away from institutions that equate compassion with corruption. I choose to maintain faith independent of your approval. I choose exile. Covenant studied me for a long moment. Interesting. You are the first in my service to choose this option. I will note it in my reports. He produced the data slate again. The exile will be formalized tomorrow at dawn. Final marking, final stripping of honors, final condemnation. Then, you will be escorted beyond Imperial borders and released. I will be ready. He departed, leaving me to contemplate what I had chosen. Terror and peace warred within me. I was choosing death, but death with dignity. I was rejecting everything I had known, but in doing so, I was preserving something essential. That night, I prayed one final time as a member of the Adepta Sororitas, not in ritual formula, but in honest conversation with whatever divine presence might exist. I do not know if you hear me. I do not know if the connection I believed in was real or imagined, but I acted according to conscience, and I will not recant. If that damns me, so be it. The Emperor protects, or he does not. Either way, I walk forward. They came for me before dawn, while darkness still held the fortress in its cold embrace. Not stormtroopers this time, but sisters from my own order. Former sisters, I corrected myself. They wore the black and white armor of the Order of the Sacred Rose, but I no longer had the right to claim kinship with them. Sister Agatha led the group. Her face was carefully neutral, but I saw pain in her eyes when they met mine. She had testified against me because she had no choice. Now she was required to participate in my final degradation. The Ecclesiarchy understood cruelty with precision, forcing those who had served alongside me to administer my punishment. "It is time," she said quietly. They had brought new clothing for me, if it could be called that. Rough penitence rags, gray and formless, marked with small symbols of excommunication. I stripped off the simple robes I had worn in the cell and donned the new garments under their watchful eyes. Modesty was a luxury the condemned were not afforded. The rags scratched against my skin, deliberately uncomfortable. Everything about this process was designed to humiliate, to break down dignity through 1,000 small degradations. But I had already made my choice. These rituals could not touch what I had decided to preserve. They led me through corridors I knew well, passages I had walked countless times over decades of service. But everything looked different now, alien and hostile. Sisters going about their morning duties stopped to stare as we passed. Some showed pity. Others showed righteous satisfaction, as if my condemnation confirmed their own superiority. We descended deeper into the convent, moving towards sections I had rarely visited. The halls of shame, sisters sometimes called them, in whispers, where the order kept records of those who had failed, who had been excommunicated or executed or transformed into servitors. A chronicle of institutional failure, maintained as warning to those who might stray. We entered a preparation chamber lined with implements of final judgment, branding irons, ritual knives, anointing oils meant for condemnation rather than blessing. Along one wall hung remnants of other excommunications, tattered armor pieces marked with the signs of those who had fallen. Canoness Commander Palmyra waited there, along with Chaplain Seraphine and 2 other senior officers whose names I did not know. They wore full ceremonial armor, making me feel even more vulnerable in my rough rags. "Melodia," Palmyra began, her voice formal and distant. "You have been judged by tribunal and found guilty of doctrinal deviation. You have rejected the path of penitence and chosen exile. Before you are cast out, you will be marked finally and completely, so that all who see you will know you are excommunicate." She gestured to Sister Agatha, who approached carrying a branding iron heated to glowing red. The symbol was the same one already burned into my left arm, but larger, meant for my forehead where it could not be hidden. "This mark declares you cast out from the Emperor's grace," Palmyra continued, "severed from the Adepta Sororitas and the protection of Holy Terra. You will carry it until death claims you." Sister Agatha's hand trembled slightly as she raised the iron. I met her eyes and saw tears threatening to spill. She did not want to do this, but duty demanded it. I nodded once, giving her permission, absolving her of responsibility for what was being forced upon her. The iron pressed against my forehead. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, even my enhanced pain tolerance insufficient to fully suppress it. The smell of burning flesh filled the chamber. I did not cry out, would not give them that satisfaction, but I could not prevent my body's involuntary responses. My muscles locked, my breath caught, tears streamed from my eyes. When the iron was removed, I felt blood and fluid running down my face. The wound would heal quickly due to my physiology, but the scar would remain forever. A black symbol marking me as condemned, visible to anyone who looked upon me. "Your honors are forfeit," Palmyra continued, gesturing to another sister who carried a bundle of items I recognized. My rosarius, the sacred icon I had worn for 80 years. The medals and campaign ribbons documenting my service across dozens of worlds. The signed commendation from the Cardinal of Ophelia VII himself, praising my leadership during the Ghast Sector Crusade. One by one, they were placed on a small altar and set aflame. I watched decades of service reduced to ash, physical manifestations of my devotion consumed by fire. Each item burning felt like a piece of my identity dying, a fragment of who I had been vanishing into smoke. "Your name is stricken from our records," Palmyra said. "All mention of Canoness Superior Melodia will be removed from the Order's archives. Your victories are credited to others. Your commands are reassigned to predecessors. You never existed except as warning to those who might follow your path." The erasure was complete. Not just excommunication, but elimination from history itself. Future sisters would never know I had served. The battles I had won would be attributed to others. The choices I had made would be forgotten except as anonymous cautionary tales about the dangers of excessive compassion. "You will now witness the cost of your deviation," Palmyra commanded. The doors to the chamber opened, and my former command squad entered. Sister Agatha, Sister Dominica, Sister Helena, others who had fought beside me for decades. They formed a line before me, and I saw that each wore a simple band of black cloth around their left arm. "Your squad has been disbanded," Chaplain Seraphin explained. "They are marked as having served under Excommunicate leadership. While not condemned themselves, they carry this shame. Their careers are limited. They will never achieve high rank. They will be assigned only to penitent missions, where survival is uncertain." I looked at their faces, seeing the weight of this judgment pressing down on them. They were being punished for my choices, their futures constrained because they had followed orders I gave. The guilt was crushing. I had not simply damned myself, but had brought consequences upon those who trusted me. "Sister Agatha," I said, my voice rough. "Sister Dominica, Sister Helena, I am sorry. You deserve better than this." Agatha's carefully maintained composure cracked. "We followed you because we believed in you, Canoness. Because you taught us that the Emperor's mercy was real. Was that wrong? Were you wrong?" Before I could answer, Palmyra struck Agatha across the face with an armored gauntlet. The blow sent her staggering, blood flowing from split lip. "You do not speak to the Excommunicate," Palmyra commanded. "You do not acknowledge their existence. They are less than nothing." The squad was dismissed, filing out without looking back. I watched them go. These women I had trained and led and cared for, now marked by association with my failure. The Ecclesiarchy's cruelty was comprehensive, punishing not just the deviant but anyone connected to them. "Come," Palmyra ordered. "You will be displayed before the assembled order." We moved through more corridors, ascending now toward the convent's main chapel. The halls were lined with sisters, hundreds of them, all in full armor. They had been assembled to witness my final degradation, to learn from my example. As we passed, some averted their eyes. Others stared with cold judgment. A few younger sisters showed confusion, not understanding why someone who had served so long could fall so completely. Their chaplains would explain later, would use my story to reinforce absolute obedience. We entered the great chapel, a vast space capable of holding the entire order. Every battle sister stationed on Ophelia VII was present, over 800 warriors arrayed in perfect ranks. They stood in silence, a sea of black and white armor, as I was led to a platform at the chapel's center. The new Canoness Superior, a woman named Constance whom I barely knew, stood at the pulpit. She was young, perhaps only 60 years in the order, but had clearly demonstrated the absolute obedience that earned rapid promotion. "Sisters," she began, her voice amplified through the chapel's vox system, "we are gathered to witness the final casting out of one who fell from grace. Behold Melodia, who was once Canoness Superior. She stands before you excommunicate, damned, rejected by the emperor and the order she once served." I stood on the platform in my penitent's rags, the fresh brand still bleeding on my forehead, facing hundreds of warriors I had once considered family. "Let her fall be lesson to you all," Constance continued. She trusted her own judgment above doctrine. She placed compassion above duty. She believed personal conscience could supersede institutional wisdom. "See where such thinking leads: to condemnation, to exile, to death unmourned and forgotten." She gestured toward me. "Look upon her and remember, the emperor protects through the Ecclesiarchy. To question the church is to question him. To deviate from protocol is to invite corruption. Absolute obedience is the only path to righteousness." The assembled sisters responded in unison, their voices shaking the chapel walls. "We serve in obedience. We trust in doctrine. We reject the heresy of personal conscience." The litany continued, each line reinforcing institutional authority over individual judgment. My excommunication was not just punishment, but pedagogy, a lesson in conformity delivered through public humiliation. I scanned the assembled faces, searching for any sign of doubt, any sister who might question whether absolute obedience was truly righteous. I found few. Most showed only acceptance of the narrative being constructed. I was the failed example. They were the faithful, who would not repeat my mistakes. But here and there, I saw uncertainty. Younger sisters whose faith was not yet absolute, older veterans who perhaps remembered times when the order valued more than just obedience. These few looked at me not with judgment but with something like recognition. I held their gazes when I found them, trying to communicate something without words. That compassion was not corruption. That conscience mattered. That institutional authority was not identical with divine will. Whether any of them understood, I could not know. The ceremony concluded with formal pronouncement of exile. I was to be transported to the edge of imperial territory and cast out with minimal supplies. My survival beyond that point was my own concern, though survival was considered unlikely. "You have one final opportunity," Constance said. "Renounce your choices, confess your sins, accept the path of repentia. Even now, redemption remains possible." I looked out at the assembled order one last time, at sisters I had trained, at battles we had fought together, at traditions and rituals that had defined my existence for over a century. Then I spoke clearly, my voice carrying through the chapel despite having no amplification. I saved 12 children who deserved life. I showed mercy to the innocent. If this is sin, then I am guilty. But I will not confess it as wrong. The emperor protects the faithful, or he does not. Either way, I walk forward without recanting. The chapel erupted in shocked murmurs. Constance's face flushed with fury. "Remove her," she commanded. "Let us be cleansed of her presence." As they dragged me from the chapel, I looked back once more. Some sisters watched with satisfaction, others with pity. But a few, a precious few, watched with something that might have been understanding. My legacy would not be the battles I won or the years I served. It would be this moment, this choice, this refusal to surrender conscience for institutional approval. And perhaps, for those few who understood. They transported me in a sealed cargo container, as if even visual contact with an excommunicate might contaminate those who served faithfully. I sat in darkness for hours, feeling the vehicle's motion without seeing our destination. The isolation was absolute, a physical manifestation of the theological separation they claimed to have imposed upon my soul. When the container finally opened, harsh sunlight blinded me temporarily. My enhanced vision adjusted quickly, revealing a landscape of desolation. We had traveled far from the convent, beyond the fortress complex, beyond the civilized zones of Ophelia VII entirely. This was frontier territory, where imperial control faded into wilderness. Inquisitor Covenant stood waiting, his black armor stark against the pale wasteland. Behind him, a simple supply cache had been assembled, a single canteen of water, 3 days' worth of nutrient wafers. Nothing else. "This is the edge," he said, gesturing toward the horizon. "Beyond this point, imperial authority does not extend. You will be escorted another 200 kilometers into the wastes and released. From that moment, you cease to be the Imperium's concern." I stepped from the container, my legs stiff from the journey. The ground beneath my feet was rocky and barren, supporting only the most primitive vegetation. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks obscured by atmospheric haze. Somewhere beyond those mountains lay true wilderness, territory that had never known human habitation. 200 kilometers, I repeated. "Why not simply execute me here?" "Because exile must be genuine," Covenant replied. "You must be cast out, not killed. The distinction matters in canon law, even if the practical result is identical." He produced a data slate, making notes with clinical efficiency. "For my records, I would like to understand your reasoning. You chose certain death over paths that offered survival or purpose. Why?" I considered refusing to answer, but found I wanted him to understand, not for his sake, but for my own. Speaking the truth aloud would reinforce my certainty in the choice I had made, because the other paths required me to accept your judgment as valid, I said. To confess that mercy was wrong, that compassion was corruption, that saving innocent lives was heresy. I cannot do that. I will not do that. So you choose pride over survival. I choose integrity over compliance. Covenant studied me, his expression unreadable. "Do you believe the Emperor approves of your choice?" The question struck deeper than he perhaps intended. Did I believe? After everything, after the excommunication and the degradation and the loss of all certainty, what remained of my faith? "I believe," I said slowly, working through thoughts as I spoke them, "that if the Emperor is just, he judges actions and intentions rather than institutional compliance. I saved innocent lives. I showed mercy to the faithful. If that is wrong by his measure, then he is not the God I have served for 137 years. And if he does not exist?" Covenant asked. "If faith is simply conditioning, psychological programming to create loyal servants, what then?" I had wrestled with this question in the cell, during the long hours of clarity after the drugs wore off. The possibility that everything I believed was constructed rather than revealed, that my prayers had always gone nowhere, that the strength I attributed to divine presence was simply enhanced physiology and training. "Then I am free," I replied. "Free to define morality based on what I believe is right, rather than on obedience to institutions claiming divine authority. Either way, whether the Emperor exists or not, I acted righteously by saving those children. The Ecclesiarchy's condemnation does not change that truth." Covenant made more notes on his data slate. "Fascinating. You have reached a form of theological independence that many would consider the ultimate heresy. You have placed your own moral judgment above both institutional and potentially divine authority. I have recognized that institutional authority and divine will are not the same thing," I corrected. The Ecclesiarchy serves an important function, but it is a human organization, fallible and political. It can be wrong. It has been wrong before. It is wrong about me. Yet you will die for this belief, Covenant observed. Die alone, unmourned. Your body eventually consumed by scavengers or the elements. Your name forgotten. Your service erased. Is that worth the maintenance of pride? It is not pride, I said, feeling anger rise for the first time. It is the refusal to betray what I know to be true. Those children deserved mercy. They deserved life. I gave them both. If the Imperium cannot accommodate that level of basic humanity, then the Imperium's definitions of heresy and righteousness are fundamentally flawed. Covenant closed the data slate. I have what I need. Thank you for your cooperation. He gestured to the stormtroopers, who had been waiting at a distance. Take her to the release point. They led me to a smaller vehicle, a rough terrain transport designed for frontier operations. I was placed in the back with my minimal supplies, and we began the journey deeper into the wasteland. The ride was rough, the vehicle navigating terrain that would have challenged even armored convoys. I used the time to examine myself honestly, to assess what remained after everything had been stripped away. My faith was uncertain now, no longer the absolute certainty that had sustained me for over a century. But something remained, something deeper than institutional conditioning. A belief that compassion mattered, that individual lives had value, that mercy was strength rather than weakness. Whether that qualified as faith in the traditional sense, I could not say. But it was enough. It would have to be enough. We traveled for 3 hours, moving deeper into regions that showed no signs of human presence. No ruins, no roads, no indication that the Imperium had ever touched this land. Finally, the vehicle stopped at the base of a mountain range that stretched endlessly in both directions. The stormtroopers unsealed the rear compartment. End of Imperial territory, one of them announced, his voice filtered through his helmet's vox. Beyond this point, you are on your own. I climbed out, accepting the canteen and nutrient wafers they handed me. The supplies felt pathetically inadequate, but I had not expected generosity from those casting me out. One final question, I said to the stormtrooper who had spoken. Do you think I deserve this? He was silent for a moment, then replied quietly. I think you were given impossible choices and made the one you could live with. Whether you deserved condemnation for that is above my authority to judge. It was more humanity than I had expected from an Imperial servant. I nodded my thanks and turned toward the mountains. Behind me, I heard the transport's engines engage, the vehicle beginning its return journey to civilization. I walked forward into the wilderness, each step taking me further from everything I had known. The fortress monastery where I had trained, the convent where I had led my sisters, the Imperium that had defined every aspect of my existence for over a century, all of it falling away behind me with each meter traveled. The first day was manageable. My enhanced physiology made the rough terrain navigable, and my training provided the knowledge to conserve energy and resources. I rationed the water carefully, knowing it would have to last as long as possible. The nutrient wafers were consumed sparingly, my enhanced metabolism able to function on minimal sustenance for extended periods. As night fell, I found shelter in a rocky outcropping that provided protection from the wind. The temperature dropped dramatically after sunset, far below what would be comfortable for normal humans. But my conditioning allowed me to endure cold that would kill unaugmented people. And I had survived worse during Arctic campaigns decades ago. I sat in the darkness, looking up at stars visible with crystal clarity in the unpolluted atmosphere. The same stars that shone above the fortress monastery, above the countless worlds where I had fought and bled. The galaxy was vast and uncaring, continuing its slow rotation regardless of individual suffering or triumph. For the first time in my life, I prayed without ritual or formula, without expecting answer or divine intervention. I spoke to the void, or to the Emperor if he existed and chose to listen, or simply to myself as a way of organizing thoughts. I do not know if you hear me. I do not know if you exist at all. But I acted according to what I believed was right. I showed mercy when doctrine demanded cruelty. I valued human life when protocol demanded efficiency. If that was wrong, I cannot comprehend a universe where righteousness means anything. The stars provided no answer, but I had not expected one. Faith, I was learning, was not about receiving confirmation but about maintaining conviction despite uncertainty. The Ecclesiarchy had taught faith as obedience, certainty purchased through submission to authority. But perhaps true faith was something else entirely. The choice to act righteously, even when no divine voice confirmed the choice was correct. The second day brought new challenges. My water was half gone, and the terrain grew increasingly difficult. I navigated through narrow mountain passes, where a single misstep could mean a fatal fall. My enhanced reflexes and strength kept me safe. But I could feel exhaustion accumulating, despite my conditioning. As I climbed, I thought about the sisters I had left behind, the ones being punished for my choices, their careers limited by association with my failure. I thought about the 12 children in the Shola Progenium, alive because I had chosen mercy. I thought about the 5 who had been found corrupted and executed, the weight of that failure still heavy on my conscience. Had I been right? Had saving 12 lives at the cost of failing to detect 5 corrupted ones been the correct choice? The Ecclesiarchy said no. That protocol existed precisely to prevent such failures. But I could not regret trying. On the third day, my supplies ran out. The last of the water was consumed at dawn, the final nutrient wafer eaten as midday approached. From this point forward, survival depended entirely on what I could find in this barren landscape. I discovered a stream fed by mountain snowmelt, the water cold and clear. I drank deeply, filling my canteen, grateful for this small mercy. But food would be more difficult. The mountains supported little life beyond the most basic organisms. I would need to hunt, to find whatever animals existed in this ecosystem. As evening approached on the third day, I encountered something unexpected. Signs of habitation. Not imperial construction, but something else. Crude shelters built from stone and native materials. I approached cautiously, every sense alert for potential threat. I found them clustered in a valley between peaks, perhaps 30 individuals living in primitive conditions. They were human, or had been once, though their appearance suggested generations of isolation from imperial civilization. They wore simple clothes fashioned from animal hides. Their tools were basic, barely advanced beyond Stone Age technology. They saw me approaching and reacted with fear. Adults moving to shield children. I recognized the gesture, the same protective instinct I had honored on Ophelia Secundus. These people, whoever they were, valued their young. That alone suggested they retained something essential of humanity. I raised my hands, showing I carried no weapons. The Excommunication brand on my forehead was clearly visible, and I saw them react to it. Did they know what it meant? Had they encountered other excommunicates? An elder approached, a woman whose age was difficult to determine through weathering and hard living. She studied me with eyes that showed intelligence and caution. "You are marked," she said in low Gothic, her accent strange but comprehensible. "Cast out by the Sky People." "I am," I confirmed. "I seek only water and perhaps shelter for a night. I will not harm you." She considered this, then gestured toward their settlement. "Come, we know what it means to be rejected by those who claim divine authority." Over the evening meal, crude but nourishing, I learned their story. They were descendants of settlers who had refused to conform to ecclesiarchal demands generations ago. They had been cast out just as I had been, left to die in the wilderness. But they had survived, building a simple life free from imperial control. "Do you pray to the Emperor?" I asked the elder. "We pray," she replied. Whether he listens to the excommunicate, we cannot know. But we pray anyway. I stayed with them for 3 days, helping where I could, learning their ways. It was tempting, the prospect of belonging somewhere again, but I declined. These people had found peace in their isolation, had built something worth preserving. My presence would only draw attention eventually, bring imperial forces who might destroy what they had created. On the morning of departure, the elder gave me supplies and advice for surviving in the deeper wilderness. "The Emperor protects," she said. "Even the excommunicated, especially the excommunicated. Perhaps because we have nothing left but faith itself." I left their valley and continued into the mountains, carrying those words with me. The journey would be long, and I would likely die before finding whatever destination awaited. But I walked forward anyway, maintaining faith the Ecclesiarchy could not touch because it had never been theirs to give or take. They cast me out from the convent at dawn, the ceremonial gates closing behind me with finality that echoed through my bones. I wear penitent's rags and carry nothing but a canteen of water. The nearest imperial settlement is 200 kilometers across wasteland I cannot cross. I will likely die within weeks, perhaps days if fortune turns cruel. But I am awake, fully, finally awake. For 137 years I served with absolute faith, never questioning, never doubting. The excommunication was meant to sever me from the Emperor. Instead, it severed me from those who claimed to speak for him. I do not know if my prayers reach him now. I do not know if they ever did. But I walk forward anyway, carrying faith the Ecclesiarchy cannot touch because it was never truly theirs to give or take. I met others in exile, people who built lives beyond institutional control. They taught me that faith is what we choose, not what authorities permit. Damnation, I have learned, is not loss of faith. It is the institutions that demand faith without deserving it. The Emperor protects, they say. Perhaps he does. Perhaps he protects even the excommunicated, or especially us, because we have nothing left but faith itself. I walk into wilderness carrying 12 names in my heart. Children who live because I chose mercy. That choice damned me by their measure. By mine, it saved my soul.